the dead of night, full of echo. Concrete jungle, dreams bust to grow. Mets in the air, chase glory, no fear. Broken bats, the heart steer clear. OMG, the chaos, what a scene. Streets buzzing like a machine. Grimace from the shadows, chills on my spine. Past haunts, the future shine. Comebacks in the night, keep dreams alive. Fighting tooth and nail just to survive. City's heartbeat echoes in our chant. Grit and glory is all we want. Brooklyn to Queens, hear the roar. From laughter to blood in every scar. Living legends made on this ground. From silence we scream, make a sound. Rising high, falling low, repeat again. Cycles of the game, addicted to the pen. Graffiti tales, spray on the wall. Met saga, forever stand tall. Rivals smear, but we push on.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to another Mets Hot Stove Live, episode 7 of Mets Hot Stove Offseason. Hopefully, everybody is doing okay, as we do have some news to talk about in regards to the MVP, Jose Siri, Meneses, and so much more topics to talk about on this episode 7 of Hot Stove tonight. But before we get started, let's say what's up to Chris and get right into the topics. What up, Chris?
Hey, man, I thought you were saying that Jose Siri won the MVP there for a second with the way that it sounded. So, yeah. Anyways, no, I appreciate it. Shout out everybody in the chat. Mets Hot Stove Live. You know where to find us on both of our channels. Make sure you're smashing those thumbs up buttons. Checking out all the latest content from both of our channels. And again, just subscribing. If you haven't subscribed already, if you're watching over on X, come over to the YouTube, both of our YouTubes, and make sure you hit that subscribe button. We definitely appreciate it. We got a plethora of topics to talk about. And we're going to be talking about, obviously topics that kind of have to take Juan Soto into consideration and into play, especially when talking about Jose Siri and the 2025 Mets outfield outlook. But it's kind of refreshing to just take a break from Juan Soto, right, for just a second. And with all the news and rumors swirling around, I'm sure his name will get tossed into this stream at some point. But yeah, let's have a good stream. And I appreciate all the support from everybody, as always. Thank you.
That sounds good to get away from the Soto talk just for at least one episode. Probably not the whole episode, but most of it. So we just found out the MVP for the National League. It was unanimous that Shohei Ohtani won the MVP unanimously. Now, look, did I expect Lindor to win? Absolutely not. But did he deserve it? Absolutely. What he did to a team that was dead and buried, 11 games under 500, so far out of a playoff spot, and then get to the Mets were, they wouldn't have been anywhere without Lindor. And, the Dodgers make the playoffs every year. Ohtani, did he make a difference getting to the World Series? Yeah, sure. But, he was basically non-existent after the injury in the World Series. So I know the playoffs don't mean nothing, but, man, you couldn't get one first-place vote for Lindor. I mean,
at least he got second place. At least he got second place.
Thank God, right? I mean, Jesus. I mean, even, Mendoza didn't even get anything useful either. It wasn't even like whatever. It's just a Mets bias that we all know about. So unfortunately,
it's never ending, Rob. It's never ending. I mean, Carlos Mendoza, I understand what the Brewers did, right, with Pat Murphy, but for Mendoza to not even be second place, for that to be Mike Schilt, are you kidding me? That's absolute garbage. And then you can go back into, the all-star campaigns and all that stuff. Lindor's name should have been on so many more different awards. Gold Glove for sure. It's a joke. It's a joke all across the board. And I hate even discussing, I hate's a strong word, but I hate discussing these awards because they're so meaningless. And, there's just no merit to them really in my mind. So whatever.
Yeah, and you know what? There is a New York bias because Aaron Judge is the best player in baseball during the season, and it's just hard to try to pick anybody else. That's why he's the MVP as a Yankee, because there's always been a New York bias when it comes to these awards, and a lot more with the Mets than it is happened to be with the Yankees. But even that is still, it just seems a little just crazy to me that our manager could even get number 2 in manager of the year vote, and Lindor didn't even get a first place vote. He got second place, great, but not one first place vote. Like, where are these New York reporters who were basically killing him for years, and now all of a sudden kissing his ass this year, and they didn't even, at least 1 or 2 of them didn't vote for them. So
they can't accept to be wrong, Rob. They can't accept to be wrong. It's just an absolute ego at this point. And you know what? Lindor is our MVP, and Mendoza is our manager of the year. Screw what everyone else thinks. Screw the votes. Those are our guys. We're backing them 100%.
Yep, 100%. So it is what it is. Like, maybe it likes to fire under them a little bit more. I don't think it needs to, but maybe it does, right? Buck Showalter was the manager of the year, and then he got fired the next year. So, oops, so it is what it is. But what can we do, right? All we can do is just move forward and talk about our topics for tonight. So I actually have this on Facebook tonight as well, streaming as well, just to throw it out there. I haven't done that in a long time, and a lot of people actually came over from Facebook about a year ago with all these shows. So if you're on Facebook right now, just head over to the YouTube channel and subscribe to both of the channels as well, as I did put the link for both channels on Facebook as well. All right, guys, so we all know, what was it, a couple of days ago, the Mets traded for Jose Siri, and doesn't it feel very similar to the Tyrone Taylor Adrian Hauser trade that came out of nowhere, right? It was kind of pushed over to the side, that trade. Adrian Hauser was the main piece in the trade, and Tyrone Taylor was the throw-in. I know Jose Siri is the only one in the trade, but it felt very similar. And what did David Stearns preach, especially last offseason? Defense. Defense wins you ball games, and there was no doubt about it. Pitching and defense basically kept us afloat for the majority of this year, especially early on when the hitting was atrocious. Defense was really good, and there was no mistaking where the Mets were pretty damn good defensively all around the board in Major League Baseball. It was because of the Harrison Bade's of the world, the Tyrone Taylors of the world, the Lindors at shortstop. Everything just worked out. Even Pete Alonso with the glove, Vientos with the glove, all around the outfield and the infield. The defense was extremely good. And don't think for a second that did not help us to get to where we were, and making the playoffs and making a little run in the playoffs as well. So the defense is key. And when you trade for Jose Siri, the first thing that came to mind was the trade for the with Hauser and Taylor, Chris, and that was the first thing I thought of. And I know the bat is not exciting for a lot of people, but if you do your offseason acquisitions elsewhere that brings the offense, Jose Siri should be what Harrison Bader was for us.
Better.
Exactly. And it's a hell of a lot more cheaper. Basically, somebody put the stats down between Siri and Bader, and Siri wins more offensive categories than Bader. And you only paying him $2.5 million compared to the $10 million you gave Harrison Bader. And Siri's better. And it's hard to say that Siri can be better than Bader, but he is, right? He has extreme speed when it comes to gap to gap. He's one of the best in that. He's in the 99th percentile in defensive percentages. He got a great arm, and he's just a guy that is a vacuum in center field. And when it comes to that, don't think David Stearns is not thinking he can, take more of that right center field at Citi Field for none other than Juan Soto, who only has to worry about probably the line. You play Siri a little bit more into the right center field gap, Chris. It saves a lot of trouble for the not great defensive abilities of Juan Soto, and that's what you're going to have to do. And I think David Stearns is kind of setting themselves up for the possibility of signing Juan Soto. And I think this Siri move is one of the reasons why, at least one of the stepping stones to getting Juan Soto. So what are your thoughts on that Jose Siri trade? Do you like it, number one? And two, what are your thoughts when you first heard about the trade going down?
Yeah, we both dropped the video doing instant reactions to this trade. It was absolute. So let's take it a step back further, because I do think that this is the automatic replacement of Harrison Bader for cheaper.
Yep.
If you all remember the content that Rob and I did last season, I said Harrison Bader and $10 million was an extreme overpay. I was screaming, to the hilltops that it was an overpay, and nobody liked that take. Everybody was just like, you know what? Harrison Bader's defense, this, defense, that. $10 million for a guy like that, that's an overpay. And it proved to be an overpay in 2024 when he fell off the face of the earth, really, after the first couple of months. So the offense is really comparable to these two guys. Jose Siri is going to get you more home runs. He's going to hit the ball harder, right? And when you're talking about Jose Siri, and I agree with what Patrick is saying in the chat, you're not going to play Jose Siri every day, right? You're not going to play him every day. Could he be your starting outfielder come opening day? Yes, absolutely. He could definitely do that. He could definitely be that. But he's not going to be an everyday type option, right? And I don't foresee that happening with the New York Mets. Obviously, there's still a lot of, stuff to, questions to answer, I guess, so to speak, about the Mets and the outfield situation. What's going to happen to a guy like Drew Gilbert? Obviously, if the Mets get Juan Soto, Drew Gilbert's name is out of the question, right? He's going back to AAA, and I wouldn't be mad at that at all. And the same thing, we could talk about in the infield when we get there for the second base spot. But listen, Jose Siri is electric. He hits the ball hard. I mean, I rewatched the replay of him just hitting a laser off of Mason Miller in that ninth inning to tie up the ball game. And the announcer was just like, Mason Miller's looking for revenge or something like that. Whatever the announcer was saying in that given moment. And he just hits an absolute missile off of Mason Miller, who throws almost 100 miles per hour. So the bat speed is there. The strikeout rate is not there, right? He strikes out at a very high clip. He strikes out around 35%. And the major league average is around 22 to 23%. So that needs to change because he chases a lot of balls. So that's his weakness offensively. Maybe if he builds a little bit of discipline, a la a guy like Javier Baez, who just magically stopped chasing balls when he came over to the Mets organization and then went right back to chasing baseballs when he signed a bigger deal with the Tigers after he left in free agency, right? That's what I'm saying. If the Mets coaching staff and these hitting coaches that are now retained for 2025 in Barnes and Chavez, if they can get Jose Siri to get some discipline, you're going to see every single metric go up for Jose Siri. The batting average is automatically going to go up. His homers are probably going to go up by just a little bit, which is kind of crazy to even think about because he's hit 25 and 18 home runs respectively for the Rays the last two seasons. And if you're trying to convince me that that's not a good trade to put in your 8 or 9 spot, then what are we doing here? If you have that kind of power in your 8 or 9 spot, which is where he'll be batting, that is awesome. And then you get into the defense, right? The only defensive statistic that you can possibly knock him on is the amount of errors that he had last season with 7. But defensive runs saved, outs above average, the range that he has, above average arm, like super above average arm, right? That is what you want out of your center fielder, whether he's going back on baseballs, whether he's coming in on them, whether he's going to his left or his right. And like you said, you can shade him in most situations. Obviously, it's situational depending to one side to try to mitigate that gap where you might be lacking with either Juan Soto or Starling Marte in right field, presumably. So there's so much to like about this. But again, Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor, that also immediately stuck out to me for 3 reasons, right? Let's compare the situation here that David Stearns has now, mimicked the last 2 off seasons. Tyrone Taylor, also around the same age when coming over to the New York Mets, right? Entering the primes of their career, kind of lackadaisical offensive numbers with their previous organizations. Same thing from, Jose Siri can be said about Tyrone Taylor when he was there in Milwaukee. Yes, the average was higher, but again, the production value was that of a 4th outfielder, right? And we saw what Tyrone Taylor did in 2024. And also the multiple years of control that you get with these guys is so important. There's 2 more arbitration years of Jose Siri left. Yep. And guess what? If it's not an organizational fit, if Jose Siri just simply does not fit into the organization, whether it's the production, the personality, because a lot of people have been talking to me about his personality and like he's fiery, which I love. I'm always an advocate for. It reminds me of Jesse Winker, probably on like a ×10 scale, but like, he's definitely out there, right? The bat flips and all. But if it doesn't work out, you can still convince another team to take him on because he's got 2 more years left on his contract before you presumably have to pay him. I look at all the advantages in the situation, especially with how the platoon worked out with Taylor and Bader last season, and knowing that Jose Siri, I'm going to say it, is a flat out better player and younger than Harrison Bader. It was a no-brainer for me. It was a no-brainer for me. And this is just a classic, typical, fantastic David Stearns move.
Yeah, and I want to bring up what Jeremy said here in the chat. He said, sorry to disagree, but Taylor is a 4th outfielder and Siri is the 5th outfielder. Now, I agree with you that Taylor's a 4th outfielder. I agree. We agree with that. But Siri is not a 5th outfielder. You got to remember, he was on the Rays team that have been successfully making the playoffs and winning 90 games. He was a starter, right? Too many people are looking at it from a different perspective. This is not a guy that's batting 3rd, 4th, or 5th in this lineup. He is batting 8th or 9th. Go around baseball and find me an 8th or 9th hitter that hits 20 home runs and around 80 to 85 RBIs. Now, the batting average is not going to be there. Maybe he can get it up a tick, maybe 10 to 15 points in total. Maybe. Let's hope that. But we're looking at it from perspective here where if you got an 8th or 9th hitter that is hitting 20 home runs and giving you 80 plus RBIs. Find that on the Mets team last year. Find that. Bader wasn't doing it. Alvarez wasn't doing it. Anybody who you wanted to put 8th or 9th wasn't doing that. Harrison Bader for $10 million gave you 12 home runs and 60-something RBIs, if I'm not mistaken? Let's see. Give me 1 second. I just wanted to check that really quick. RBIs, 51 RBIs for Harrison Bader in 143 games, right? Siri beat that by 6 home runs and 24 RBIs. That's how many more home runs to RBIs he had over Harrison Bader for $7 million less. That's a huge difference. And he's better defensively to Harrison Bader. Speed, gap-to-gap speed, gap-to-gap running down balls, everything like that. And this is not a situation where Siri will probably play every day, right? There'll be situations where you probably put Tyrone Taylor in 2 or 3 times a week, which is fine. Again, we're looking at it at a different perspective. Now, if this was Sandy Alderson and the Wilpons, I would say this is probably the biggest trade of the offseason, the biggest move of the offseason. If Jose Siri was the big move, then it would be pointless. Then we can complain about it. But it's not going to be. If you don't get Juan Soto, but you get Anthony Santander, or they really believe that Gilbert's the guy, put him in right field, good to go, because he can play the corner as well, right? You're still adding to this team, right? Say if Pete Alonso comes back. Say if you want to get a couple, other guys as well, and you already put it with the core you already have, it's successful because you already got 1 through 7 that is already deep, and you already got an 8th or 9th hitter wherever Siri's going to play with around 18 to 20 home runs, probably maybe more. That's the difference. You have to look at it from a whole perspective. Too many times people complain and bitch and moan about, oh, well, he's a good hitter, but he's bad defensively, right? How many times did we didn't want certain guys, right? We didn't want Harrison Bader in center field when it got to the playoffs because he wasn't hitting, right? We didn't care about his defense. Tyrone Taylor was getting the bigger hits, so we let him play out there. We have to understand the perspective of this whole entire player as a whole, because it's not just about scoring runs. If you, again, we talked about this during the season. If your 2 through 5 hitter let's do 1 through 5 aren't doing the job, that's the only time you're going to be talking about the 7th, 8th, and 9th hitters. That's the point. We talked about this all season long. When your core guys are not doing the job, that's when we start complaining about the 7, 8, 9 hitter not hitting. That's why we started to complain about Alvarez and Bader, and you can go on and on. The fact of the matter is, if you're going to complain about Jose Siri during the season, that means your core guys are not doing the job. It's just that simple. And you're not going to win. Right?
Yeah.
That's
I agree with you.
Jose Siri's a player.
I like what Junior's saying in the chat too. Siri is what a lot of baseball fans said Carlos Gomez was. I can see that comparison a lot. I can see that comparison a lot. And the Mets really had 2 different routes they could have, taken, right? I threw out 3 names on one of my videos talking about potential trade candidates for center field because, the free agent market in terms of pure center fielders, it just wasn't there. It was like Kevin Pillar and Harrison Bader. And, you guys would have been complaining even more if those were the options, right, that we got over Jose Siri. So I basically threw out Lane Thomas, Cedric Mullins, and Luis Robert Jr. Well, Luis Robert Jr., obviously injury history, right? We don't know what the White Sox situation is. We don't know if they're going to trade him. They should, but we don't know. The only guy on that list, right, and Cedric Mullins is coming off one of his worst defensive campaigns in 2024. The only guy that I maybe would have rather have in terms of pursuing a different route was a guy like Lane Thomas. Like, that was my guy to get. But again, like different situations, the Guardians are still competing in their division. Like they just are coming off of an ALCS performance. So, there's a lot of other factors that go into it, and Lane Thomas is the only other guy in comparison to a guy like Jose Siri that I could have looked at and said, I would rather have that guy more. Maybe I would have said the same thing about Cedric Mullins as well. But again, if we're talking defense and we know the type of, Pobo and GM that David Stearns is, he's going to prioritize the defense. So a guy that's coming off of -5 defensive runs saved in 2024, as Cedric Mullins was, compared to a guy that's coming off of a season where he had 12 defensive runs saved in Jose Siri last season for the Rays. I mean, it's a no-brainer in that category. So again, the reason why we've talked about it all the time. I'm not sure exactly where you stand on this, but I have a lot of question marks still about the philosophies of Jeremy Barnes and Eric Chavez in terms of making this lineup its most optimal, right? But if there's one thing that a guy like especially Eric Chavez preaches, and we can agree with it or disagree with it all we want, but he has been known to come out and say he prioritizes contact, right? So if Eric Chavez can just get with Jose Siri one-on-one, and those opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of approaches that Jose Siri has, high power, high, hard hit rate, but just strikes out a ton. And Eric Chavez, who's on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of the hitting approach, can get together and meet in the middle. I mean, that's a perfect world scenario. And that's kind of what I'm looking out for in 2025. Again, it's a huge what if, but the tools are there. The tools are most certainly there. 100%.
Yeah. And people are talking about Lane Thomas as well. Again, we're acting like we traded something of importance away for Siri. We didn't. Eric Orsi wasn't even going to be on the 40-man roster. He was going to be unprotected in the Rule 5. That's also what he was going to be. So Stearns was like, if I'm going to keep him off the 40-man or risk losing him, then guess what? I got something for him. And it's going to
actually was Orsi going to be on the and was he Rule 5 eligible?
I think he was. I was because I was reading
about that. I didn't really know because I didn't check.
I was reading an article. I mean, the article could be wrong, but I believe he was eligible. I think this was his last year to be eligible for the Rule 5. I could be wrong about that, but even so, this is the guy that wasn't going to be on this team this year. And if he was on the 40-man, he was going to be very, very low on the 40-man.
That's right. He was Rule 5 eligible because he came into the league in 2021, even though he's 27 years old. And the Rule 5 is if you're like 18 years or older and then you sign with your major league club, it's like 4 years. So this would have put 2025 as his year. Yep.
Well, exactly. So he was going to be Rule 5 eligible. He was going to be unprotected. So why lose him for nothing when you can get a guy that can be beneficial for this team? And that's the point. That's what I don't understand why people are mad about this trade. Who did you want? Lane Thomas? Lane Thomas is going to cost you probably between $5 and $10 million, maybe, and he's probably going to get a 2-year deal. So you're not doing that for a guy that is, to spend $10 to $15 million on a guy like Lane Thomas. You're just not going to do that. You got a guy who is arbitration eligible for the next couple of years, and what is he going to cost you? Maybe $6 to $7 million over the course of that arbitration period each year.
The one thing I'll push back on you on is Lane Thomas would have cost like 8.5, probably. He would have cost like 8.5. It's more than Siri, yes, of course.
You made my point even better. That's exactly what you did, right? Because you didn't give up nothing. A guy you were going to lose either in the Rule 5, and even if he didn't go in the Rule 5, he was going to be off the 40-man and probably put back on at some point. But a guy that's probably one of the last couple of guys, if Orsi is pitching in our bullpen, there's a massive problem in his bullpen if he's pitching for it. Major injuries or somebody's not doing their job. So you got something for him, somebody that can actually help this team, even if it is only defensively. But I'm sorry, if you give me a guy 8th or 9th batting, hitting 20 home runs and 80 RBIs, which he, does frequently, that's fine. And then you put him in New York, you put him with guys that, because it didn't seem like he was like controlled in Tampa. It just seemed like they just let him, run free and do whatever he wanted to do. He's not going to do that here. Lindor's going to control that narrative 100%. If Siri gets out of line, Lindor's going to take him to the side. Couldn't hit a bigger home run for the New York Mets. And he ran around the bases with no emotion. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, guys? Chris, can you hear me? Oh, sorry, guys. I'm sorry about that. I think my mic went out or something, and then Chris bounced off for a second. I'm sorry about that, guys. Okay, you can hear me. All right, sorry about that, because I heard everything just go quiet everywhere. All right, cool. Sorry about that, guys. So that's the whole point. You're going to get a guy that was Rule 5 eligible, off the, unprotected on the 40-man. So what do you think is going to happen, right?
Are we good?
Yeah, we're good. I'm sorry. I thought my mic cut off or something, but I don't know what it was. Everything just
something was weird there for sure. Something was weird there.
So that's the whole point. And I think because I said Siri, that my MacBook opened up Siri. So there you go. Yeah. Oops. But yeah,
that's probably what it was then. That's probably what it was.
Yeah, exactly what it was, because I saw this freaking thing pop up. So the fact of the matter is, you got a productive player, regardless of how you think of him offensively, he's going to be productive defensively. And Stearns preaches that every moment of every day. And guys, go throughout baseball's lineups, every team, 7 through 9. Tell me has great players 7 through 9. You're not going to get them. It's just not happening. Even the Dodgers didn't have that 7 through 9. They really didn't. So the fact that we got Siri that's going to be great in center field, that is going to control the gaps with probably a hobbled Nimmo in left, and a right field that, even if it's not Soto, say if it is Marte to start and Gilbert comes up later on, you have a great center fielder that's going to control your gaps and protect Nimmo's limited ability, and say either Marte or Soto's ability in right field. He takes away those gaps for those guys. So all they got to patrol is basically their area in left and right field and the lines. That's it. And that's the point. And I think that's what Stearns' mindset is when it comes to Jose Siri. Again, we didn't give up nothing. Nothing of importance. The money's very low, and you got him controllable, and he's still under 30 years old. That's not bad. Really
I'm not losing sleep over Eric Orsi being in the Rays organization. Could he go? I mean, he had a 2.92 ERA in AAA anyways last season. So, I mean, whatever that's worth. But, could he go there and find success because of the Rays' known pitching lab? Yes, absolutely. But again, in hindsight, he was never going to be a difference maker for the Mets in 2025. And by the way, while we're on the topic, the Rule 5 sort of draft decisions just happened, and the Mets chose not to add anybody on the 40-man roster. So that signifies two things to me, right? That signifies two things to me, and it's very important. So guys, please listen up. 34 guys are officially on the Mets 40-man roster right now. That's 6 spots available. And, there could be a reason why, obvious candidates that the Mets could have added to their 40-man roster were Mike Vasil and Dom Hamill, right? That would be 36 guys on your 40-man roster. So what this signifies to me is that they're looking at both trades and free agency, because you got those 6 spots to fill. Now, again, I'm not really sure if Orsi, again, there's conflicting. Your article that you read, I don't know if Orsi was actually, Rule 5 eligible. It doesn't really matter at this point. I know who was Rule 5 eligible. It was Vasil and it was Hamill. And the Mets decided not to put them on the 40-man. But the Mets can go, and these guys are on the cusp of being MLB ready. Even though they struggled in 2024 in the farm system, they struggled mightily. I will say that. But other teams could take chances on those guys. They could flip those guys as well and trade them for valuable pieces just like the Mets did with this Jose Siri trade. So like that's not out of the question. So what that signifies to me is that the Mets are anticipating a lot of moves happening, obviously, by not adding two guys that they know they're not going to have any use for in 2025 because they're going to have a loaded offseason worth of free agents and more trades. And if you think the Jose Siri trade is the last one we see in this offseason for the Mets, you're mistaken. I'll just say that right now.
You made a great point. And guess what? Similar to last year, we had 32 guys on the 40-man when the offseason started. We knew we had to add guys. Right, that was obvious. It wasn't going to be top of the line guys because that was already said during the offseason last year. But we had a ton of room on the 40-man. Right, we needed a rotation, and we had a ton of guys on the on the 40-man as well. And it's similar to this year. It just anticipates moves, and not everybody was excited about the moves last year, but there was a ton of moves. We talked about the trade with Hauser and Taylor. Right, it was Manaea, it was Severino. Right, it was 3, 4, 5 sign-ins and a trade, and that added to the 40-man roster, and that's what Stearns is doing here. Right, he could have easily put Vazel and Hamill on the 40-man, but didn't. Why didn't he do that? Well, because he's anticipating a big offseason, regardless of the names. Whoever you want, we have our own opinions about that. But
let's talk about the names. We're like 31 minutes into the stream talking about Jose Siri. Exactly,
because we know he's going to be an important piece to this team. We already know that, and the fact that there's so much room on the 40-man is it couldn't hit you in your face harder. Moves are happening, free agency or trades. It's going to add to this 40-man roster, right? No matter what names you're talking about, it's going to make it a big. I think it's going to be a big offseason, and it's just leading up to that. And what's not more fun than that, right? The anticipation is already getting us excited, right? We already know about the Juan Soto situation, right? I think the Juan Soto situation is kind of making everything else, like the pitching market, on the back burners for the moment, at least starting pitching. So, going with Jose Siri, the Mets right about an hour before we came on, the Mets signed Joey Meneses to a minor league deal, invite to spring training. We know this guy, he's hit big, he killed the Mets, right? He didn't hit against anybody else, but he killed the Mets, right? He's a contact guy, right? We're talking about contact. He's a contact guy, right? He'll hit his home runs every now and then, but he puts the bat on the ball. I'm not saying he's going to make the team. I'm not saying that he's going to show anything where he can, remain in the minors, because he probably has an opt-out if he does get into the minor leagues or something like that. But you're right. It's a G-Man choice situation. I think you put that out on X before the stream. So give me your thoughts on the Meneses signing, minor league signing and invite to spring training.
Yeah, it's exactly that. You hope that he does well enough in spring training to perhaps convince you that, he could be on your roster. But again, we've had so many conversations already surrounding the outlook of the Mets and who's going to take the final roster spot. I think I talked about that in one of my videos and definitely one of my live streams. I'm not expecting anything. Again, as I mentioned on my X account, my Twitter account, whatever you want to call it, this is a G-Man Choi 2.0 situation, right? I believe Meneses only really has 3 years under his belt, right, with the Nationals. So he got a late start into the league. He's about 31 years old, I want to believe, maybe even more, honestly. He's in the prime of his career right now. If he had a prime. And he came out of the gates hot, right? He came out of this first season really just firing on all cylinders, right?
Yep.
Came out of the gates really hot. And he just kind of just dwindled as the years went by, as the last 3 years went by. So he hit for over 300 batting average in his first season with the Nationals, 13 home runs. Second season was in 2023, so that was not this past year, but the year before that. And people forget that I believe he only hit 275, but he was also just in the consideration of being a replacement all-star that year as well. I don't think he actually got to be a reserve, but he was in consideration. 13 home runs that year as well. But if you take a look at, and he obviously struggled in 2024, right? I mean, it was just a bad year for him. But each year I've seen the regressions. But again, how much sample size can you really say of a guy in his total career? If we talk about regressions from guys for the past 3 years, we usually like to look at, a guy like Luis Severino, who was at the top of his game, right, 5 years ago in 2019 or 2018. And Meneses, we don't really have that kind of sample size to go along with him. So the last 3 years of what you see is what you get. So you hope by bringing him on a minor league deal, he goes out in spring training and absolutely kills it. But guys, in no way, shape, or form is this any significance to what is going to happen with Pete Alonso. They're not signing Meneses, right, to be Pete Alonso's replacement. It's just simply just silly. And again, even if Meneses kills it, you hope you can convince him to stay in the organization if he does have that option to leave. Just like G-Man Choi opted to go into the organization when he could have left after spring training, because guys want to buy into this organization. That's what you hope. And that's best case scenario. So I'm not expecting anything from Joey Meneses. Again, was at one point a good hitter, but some of these guys who start out of the gates hot, they fizzle out. And that's just the nature of the game. The elite guys will find a way to stick around and find a way to adjust when pitchers figure them out. Joey Meneses seems like he's one of those guys that when pitchers have figured him out, he's kind of just shied away and he hasn't figured out an adjustment. So we'll see what happens. Again, you need these types of signings to keep things competitive in spring training. So it's not like a useless signing where, it serves no purpose. Let's not forget that, we have guys that are coming up through the wings. Ryan Clifford is an option to be a first baseman for this team in future years, depending on what happens with Pete Alonso. So these older vets can challenge these young players in spring training. You're going to see Ryan Clifford in spring training. You're going to see Joey Meneses in spring training. You're going to see all these young guys that either, might make the major league roster like Acuna or Gilbert, or might not and go back to AAA. And that's okay. There needs to be some competition. And if that's the only purpose that this move serves, then so be it. But again, what if he goes out there and absolutely returns to the 2022 version of Joey Meneses, right, in spring training, and he kills it? New organization, new names, the old him. I mean, you're talking about a completely different scenario at that point. So again, a lot of people like to take these signings at face value based off of what these guys produced this past year, but there's an overarching purpose, for me at least, that I see a value for this organization to bring a guy like that on board, right? That's already a veteran and has had that success before. So anyways.
Yeah, and with Meneses, I see this as a Jose Iglesias type signing where it's a minor league signing, invite to spring training. If you have a good spring training, make some promises if you want to. Tell them, hey, if there's an injury and you're playing well, you're going to be the first guy up. That's it, right? That's how you got to call it, right? We know Meneses is basically a first baseman. You're not going to use him as a DH. So, God forbid if, say if the Mets do get Alonso and Alonso gets hurt or something like that, he's been prone to freaking injuries with his hand by getting hit by pitches. Say if he misses a couple of weeks, right? Joey Meneses can be the first man up and he'll replace Pete Alonso for a couple of weeks. I know it's not the best thing in the world, but, it's an option. So that's the thing you got to do, and this is the other reason why when people talk about the organization, the culture, people want to stay in organizations that have a good culture, that tell them the truth. Remember what a lot of the players said, that David Stearns basically told them the truth. Hey, you're not going to be starting here. You're not going to start the season with this team, but I'll keep you in mind when we need to replace somebody, right? He was honest with the players. Players love honesty from the organization, right? Don't lie to them. If you tell them the truth, everything's good. And I think they want to stay within the organization. And that's this signing from Meneses is nothing crazy, but it's a situation where it's a depth option just in case. And if he wants to stay with the organization, great. And maybe he'll be one of the first guys called if something happens to whoever's playing first base for the Mets in 2025. So it's not the end of the world, right? This is depth moves, and invite to spring signings happen all the time. So,
and this has nothing to do with Pete Alonso.
No.
Let's make it be clear, twice.
No. Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry. I'm just checking a couple of comments here. Game 4 as a plus defense outfield, he'll run for right field. Yeah, well, exactly the point. He's going to expand the defensive capabilities, and you know what? He can probably limit, the mistakes by the Nimos of the world, the Juan Sotos of the world, if that's the case. So again, Siri and Meneses looks. And again, I'm sorry, guys.
I thought it was me the first time, but it's definitely on your end at this point.
I'm not saying Jose with the S. That's what I'm going to call him because it keeps on waking up, you know who. So I'm sorry, guys. So let's get to the next topic because if I keep on saying that name, you're just never going to hear me again. So I apologize for that. All right. So the reliever trade market now. That's probably going to happen. Well, the trades might happen a lot sooner. And the trades, or at least the people that might be available in regards to the trade market for relievers is, Helsley of the Cardinals, Finnegan of the Nationals, Williams of the Brewers, right? These guys are all closers. Now, why are we talking about this when the Mets have Edwin Diaz? Well, each one of them are free agents after this year. That's why it's a big deal, right? We already heard the Cardinals looking to trade Arenado. They're trying to shed money. They're not contending next year. So that's an option, right? Finnegan, right? The Nationals are probably another year away before they really start getting their younger kids up there and, be competitive. So Finnegan is not going to be on the Nationals, right? You're going to look to trade him. He has 1 year on his deal. Again, all these guys have 1 year left on their deal. And Devin Williams, we all know about Devin Williams, one of the best closers in baseball. We know Alonso took him deep in the playoffs in a wild card series. We get that. Why are we talking about them? Because they could be options on a 1 year deal, right? They don't have no trade clauses. They get traded. They're sticking with that team. And in a case where I don't know if David Stearns wants to spend big time money on anybody that's not a closer, how do you do that? You make a trade, right? They're not going to cost a lot considering they only got 1 year deal left on their deal. Now, I'm not going to say they're not going to cost nothing. They will. But if you want a bridge that is better than Stanek, and all these guys are better than Stanek, if you want guys better than the guys that the Mets could have in this bullpen, right? Tanner Scott, I don't believe is an option. Right, we can go, you talk about Minter, who could be an option. These guys are legit. These guys could be the bridge to Diaz. These guys could be a closer, once or twice a week when Diaz might not be available. So, Chris, I ask you, do you think this is a possibility more because of the fact that David Stearns is not a guy that likes to spend big on bullpen arms? That's been established. We understand that. And because bullpens are so fickle, do you try to get one of these guys, bring them in, bridge them with Diaz, and now you got a 1-2 punch in the later innings that could be the best in baseball? What are your thoughts on the trade market for relievers?
Two of those names that you just mentioned is more realistic than the third. So the two names that are realistic is Kyle Finnegan and Devin Williams. I've been a fan of Kyle Finnegan for a long time, and he is probably one of the more consistent relievers that you will see out there, whether the Nationals put him up on the trade block or not. But listen, this guy is electric, man. He's electric. He had 36 saves. He's eligible to go and be a eighth inning guy for you. And again, I don't know what the national situation is going to be, to be honest with you. They could be competing this year. They could not be competing this year. I don't really know. In division trades, I have no idea. But I like Kyle Finnegan a lot. I really do. Devin Williams is the guy to get, though. Devin Williams is my favorite target. I love Devin Williams. I don't care that he surrendered the game tying or game go ahead home run, whatever you want to, is a game go ahead home run, right? We all know that. Whether he was tipping his pitches or not, I actually dropped a video about this on my channel. The link is in the description down below about these two guys. I talked about Helsley and Williams, but it makes sense because Devin Williams is a guy that has an airbender changeup the club just denied his $10.5 million club option, right? And they're not going to pay him. He's going to have a major payday after the 2025 season. So it's reuniting with a guy that you're familiar with makes so much sense if you're David Stearns.
Mhm.
Now, Helsley's a different situation because he's coming off of a 49 save season campaign, and the Cardinals are going to want an arm and a leg for him.
Yep.
An arm and a leg for him. And I'm not quite sure. I'm not, it's not that I'm not quite sure. I know that David Stearns is not going to do that in terms of sending over that prospect capital for a guy like Ryan Helsley, because he did the reverse of that by trading Josh Hader when he was the GM of the Brewers.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
Yep.
And so I take a look at all three guys and I'm like, Kyle Finnegan is the most consistent. Devin Williams has the most upside. All three of these guys are closers. But again, if you're the Mets and if you can get one of these guys on a steal of a deal, presumably either Williams, because the Brewers are going to be competing for a playoff spot and being competitive, so you can send MLB ready talent over to them.
Yep.
Whereas you'd have to send top 5, top 10 picks to the Cardinals for their guy. Those two guys are who you want. And you could still bring back a guy like Ryan Stanek to compete for the 7th inning role alongside Reed Garrett. Again, Devin Williams, the major concern from him is the stress fractures that he had in his back in 2024. That's the major concern. And it took him a little bit to get his footing under him in this 2024 campaign. It did. I'm not going to lie. And I also saw during my video, that I talked about these guys, there was a little bit of a trend with Devin Williams in terms of his 2023 pitch usage compared to 2024. In 2023, the bread and butter obviously was the changeup. In his all-star season, he had 36 saves, phenomenal season. But he used his four-seam fastball more in 2024, in a lesser sample size, obviously, but I'm kind of curious as to why that was. So again, another guy that you can bring into this organization. And if you really do value Jeremy Hefner all that much by keeping him around with different regimes, etc., imagine trying to get Devin Williams just right. And if you're successful in doing so, having him and Edwin Diaz in the back end of your bullpen going alongside a guy like maybe Jose Butto and Reed Garrett. Imagine that, Rob. Imagine that.
Yeah.
So, just to rank these guys, to be honest with you, Williams is my number 1. Finnegan, again, he's 33 years old, which is why the Nationals would probably want to just get some value out of him because they're not going to have any use for him in terms of re-signing him. But Williams, Finnegan, and Helsley would probably be my number 1 if he didn't have such a great season and if I didn't think that he was going to, go ahead and make a 5-year, 6-year contract after this season. The one thing I would probably be hesitant about is that if a trade negotiation starts between the Mets and these teams, is there going to be any pushback from these players in terms of knowing that they're going to be competing for their next contract, but also knowing that they will not be closing for the Mets in 2025? Will they go to the front office, whether they have, I guess a no trade clause or not, which I don't think any of these guys do? No. Are they going to push back hard and be like, can you please at least do right by me and trade me to a situation where I'm still going to close? That's the only sort of hiccup that I could foresee. But these are 3 elite names, man. 3 elite names.
Yeah, I mean, they could if they want to, but you know what? The organization is going to look out for the best of the organization, right? If they really care about the player, you would sign him, right? It's not going to do that either 3 of these teams. So I don't think that's going to be the case. They'd probably be upset. But if you have a dominant year, say with the Mets, any 3 of these guys as an 8th inning guy, and when you get your occasional chances in the 9th inning to close games, you're going to get paid anyway, because people know you're a closer. So I don't think it's going to be much of that, because look, how many times did we see, closers go to other teams that weren't even a closer for their team that they got traded to, and they pitched well, and then they became closers somewhere else the following year where they signed somewhere else. So I agree with Chris. I think Devin Williams is probably the top of the target. And the reason why, not because I like Devin Williams and his stuff. David Stearns has a relationship with the Brewers organization, right? He knows inside and out of that organization. He knows basically everybody in that organization. When you have relationships with teams, you tend to have more trades between those teams more often than not. And what I was thinking when it comes to the Brewers as well, I think this can lead to hey, would they take Brett Beatty? And I know Met fans don't care about Brett Beatty. He has no value. That's not, he might not have value to the Mets, but other teams might still see that, especially teams like the Brewers who are trying to save money. Beatty has a lot of control left. He's very cheap. And by the way, the starting third baseman for the Brewers in 2024 is one of their top prospects, who is a shortstop. He was playing third base because of Willy Adames at shortstop. He's going to get pushed over. And remember, if you guys were paying attention to the last couple of games of the season against the Brewers and the postseason, that's all they talked about on the national broadcast about the third base. I forgot his name, but the third baseman is their top prospect.
The Joey Ortiz? I think it's Joey Ortiz.
Correct. Him. He's a shortstop. And that's the reason why the Brewers are not signing him. They said that he's going to move right over to shortstop. So where's the opening now for the Brewers? Is third base. How about if you dangle Brett Beatty in front of them and say, hey, he could be a young third baseman? And that might sound crazy to a lot of people, but we're talking about the Brewers who don't want to spend money. Right?
Makes sense to me. Perfect sense to me.
I actually think that's a fair trade. And people are like, how are you crazy? You got one of the best closers in baseball. Again, they're trying to get value. Chris has talked about they're trying to get value. Now, could they go elsewhere and get something else? More? Yeah, possibly. But again, with David Stearns and the relationship he has with the Brewers, right? Does anybody remember who we traded for Adrian Hauser and Tyrone Taylor? A lot of people probably forgot already, right? You know why? Because Stearns has a relationship. I'm not saying to, screw them, but Brett Beatty is controllable. And he can be your starting third baseman. This is a Brewers team that loves to try young players. And there's no reason why Brett Beatty, if you get him out of that New York spotlight, just calms down and becomes a solid player. And now the Brewers have a third baseman of the future with control and being cheap. So I thought that right off the bat when he talked about Devin Williams. I'm like, the relationship with Stearns, and they're going to need a third baseman considering the fact that Joey Ortiz was their third baseman and now is going to move over to shortstop because of Willy Adames leaving. Brett Beatty is a perfect option. And you could throw in a lower level minor leaguer if you want to, maybe a pitcher from the lower depths of the minors, make it sweeten the pot a little bit. But why not?
They want to get that $8 million off the books, man. That's what Devin Williams is scheduled to make in arbitration. I believe he's in arbitration. I don't know.
Yeah,
but anyway, they want to get that money off the books, dude. They want to get that money off the books.
Exactly. And again, with the relationship that Stearns has with that organization, all he has to do is make a quick phone call. And if he's a little aggressive about it, why not? Like, Brett Beatty's not going to be a part of this team. Sorry, guys, if anybody believes that, it's just not going to happen. And Beatty still has value because he's still young. He's still controllable. And it only takes one team to say, we can help him. We can fix him, right? The guy hits bombs in the minors every single day, comes to the majors and hits ground balls. So, maybe they got better analytics when it comes to launch angle or something. I don't know. But I think that's a good, go to the Brewers and say, we'll give you Brett Beatty and a lower level minor league pitcher. You don't think they're going to say no? They want to get that $8.5 million off the books. It's perfect. It's a perfect situation. It seems like a perfect match. Now, will that happen? Who the hell knows? But I do agree with you that Devin Williams at the top of the list because of what I said and what we both said is that I like Devin Williams, right? Finnegan, I think the Nationals are not going to trade him to the Mets. I just don't feel like there's any relationship there. And again, Helsley is just it's going to take too much. And I don't think Stearns wants to do that for an eighth inning guy that's not even going to be a closer. Now, if the Mets were looking for a closer, I could see him doing that. But because he's not, it's not worth it for an eighth inning guy. It would be crazy to do that because you probably have to give up a top prospect.
Keep in mind, I also dropped another video of another guy that can be a bridge guy to Edwin Diaz. That's a free agent and would also cost a little bit less in terms of the actual contract that you give him. But there is an injury concern if he'll actually be ready by spring training or not. And that's Jimmy Garcia, who has had a phenomenal campaign the last 2 years. And it reminds me, well, more so the last year, but 2023, his production mimicked that of Ryan Stanek. So if you can bring both of those guys, into the organization, regardless of whether you bring in a guy like Devin Williams or Kyle Finnegan, Jimmy Garcia is another underrated candidate. But I know we're talking trades here. So again, that's my list. And we have to take a look at the situational, aspects for the Mets as well, right? I mean, Edwin Diaz, presumably will be opting into his player option that he has in his contract, and the club option doesn't expire, I believe, until he's 34 years old. Devin Williams is 30 years old right now. Going into his age 31 season, he's going to be getting a contract extension with whoever he ends up with, presumably for a multi-year deal. Kyle Finnegan is a unique case because, again, he's 33 years old going on 34. That 1 year that he has left, you can probably renegotiate another 1 or 2 years with him, but it's going to be a low-level deal, and it's not going to be a multi-year deal because, again, you don't give relievers that are in their 33, 34, 35 range multi-year deals. Like, no matter how good they are, it just simply does not happen. So, again, unique aspects, and I'm sure there's another reliever out there that we're not talking about right now that will be on the trade block that will gauge some interest. We just haven't heard about it yet. But with all three of these teams, the Cardinals, the Brewers, and the Nationals, it makes sense why they would have each of these three respective guys on the trade block.
Yeah, exactly. So, is it a possibility? Absolutely, it is. Right, as all the hints that and the points that we gave through that reliever trade market situation, especially with Devin Williams. All right, so the next topic is the three infielders, right? McNeil, Acuna, Iglesias. Me and Chris were talking about this, messaging back and forth to each other prior to the stream or throughout the day when we were talking about topics. We both agreed, and I wanted to see if everybody agrees in the comments. 2 out of the 3 are going to be on this team, guys. You can't hold 3 of these guys. You just can't. It just doesn't make sense, right? I know it happened later when McNeil came back in the playoffs, but if McNeil was healthy, it would have been very hard for Acuna to come up, right? I think we all agree with that. So at this point, if everybody is still on the roster, Acuna is going back to the minor leagues if Iglesias and if McNeil's on the roster and Iglesias comes back. Acuna is probably going back to the minor leagues, in my opinion. Now, I don't believe Stearns wants to do that. So I think Acuna is going to be a part of this team, even if it's on the bench or the starting second baseman. So that leaves me with a question for you, Chris. McNeil or Iglesias, because I think that's going to be the case. I think Acuna is going to be on this team. I think he showed enough where Stearns thinks that he can be valuable to this team. The fact of the matter is, McNeil has a contract with the Mets. Iglesias is a free agent. So what do you do?
Yeah, I want to see Jose Iglesias back on this team, but just like with Acuna knocking on the door and with a trade of McNeil, and again, I know that there's a lot of McNeil supporters in this fan base. And again, he's had some really great seasons for the Mets, but they gave him a contract and he's underperformed for the large majority of the last 2 seasons after he had and got said contract. So naturally, there's going to be conversations surrounding McNeil. Unfortunately, and people could disagree, and I've already heard some pushback on this, I don't think that there's any team that is willing to take on that kind of money over the next 2 seasons of Jeff McNeil. Not if the Mets don't pay a dime of that contract. And that should tell you something, right? If the Mets have to pay off, right, a portion of money to send these guys back or to somewhere, then those teams probably are taking a flyer on them and they're kind of hesitant. Unless you're just getting ridiculous money like Scherzer and Verlander were, and it was absolutely necessary because other teams just couldn't support that high AAV. If a team can't, bring on $15 million, it's understandable, but I just don't know what the confidence level is of bringing on a guy that has just struggled mightily over the last 2 seasons. Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't really make sense. And again, I'm not discrediting the player that McNeil is, because when he's at the top of his game, I mean, he's great. He's hitting for high average, right? Slap hitter, getting on base, maybe some gap-to-gap power like we saw in 2022. He's awesome. But I mean, are we going to see that version of Jeff McNeil again? Are we going to hold out hope and let it be the reason for why we don't bring a guy like Jose Iglesias back, which, Mets fans are kind of hopeful that Iglesias replicates the numbers that he did in 2024 as well. And I understand that flip side of it. But again, you can't say, Jose Iglesias won't replicate what he did in 2024 for the Mets. That would be hopeful thinking if you're also being hopeful about what Jeff McNeil could possibly do in 2025 when we really haven't seen it for the large majority of the last 2 seasons. Listen, the way that I think this shakes out is that I've been very adamant that the Mets won't find a trade partner for McNeil, right? I'm very adamant in that. Regardless of what the Mets front office confidence level is in Jeff McNeil, again, you have to find the right trade partner that's willing to take that money on, or just him eating up a roster spot if they don't have that talent at second base already. And I'm sure there would be a few teams that are willing to take a flyer on him, but given you have to sort of eat that money if you're the Mets, would it make sense to bring back Jose Iglesias just to have to trade and eat money on Jeff McNeil? I'm not really too convinced. So the way that I see it playing out is Jose Iglesias goes elsewhere in free agency, and Jeff McNeil is your starting second baseman, and perhaps Acuna could be on the bench, right, for 2025 and beyond. But another realistic scenario is just running it back with what you had last season when Iglesias came back, right, or came up, is that you run the team with a platoon of McNeil and Iglesias, and Acuna starts off in AAA. And if one of those guys in McNeil or Iglesias struggles in the first half, and one of them is bound to, right? One of them is bound to. At least that's what the percentages say, right? Yeah. You can potentially cut ties with one of those guys and bring up Acuna. That's like perfect world scenario. So I'd probably estimate that Iglesias won't come back, but again, stranger things have happened. And another name that we haven't talked about is Winker. I don't think he's coming back by a large majority. I think that there's no room for that guy, unfortunately, because I do like Winker a lot, and I wish that, he would make his way back to this team, but I just don't think it's feasible. But we have to have the careful conversations of expecting too much from Jeff McNeil, right? We had a 37-game sample size in the second half of 2024 of Jeff McNeil, where he was raking, right? I mean, the guy was on fire. It was just night and day different to what we saw in the first half version of Jeff McNeil. But can we see that version of him consistently? I just don't know, Rob. I'm not convinced. And I'm not going to make the excuse of being hopeful of Jeff McNeil coming around a reason for why a guy like Acuna shouldn't make the team, or a guy like Iglesias shouldn't be brought back, or a guy like Adames can't be brought onto this team and play second base. You know what I mean? Like, if you're using McNeil as the excuse for not pursuing other options, I think that's where the problem lies, in my humble opinion. Again, just my opinion. I know a lot of people are still hopeful about Jeff McNeil, but I think it's a very dangerous path to go on and to go down to expect that production to return.
Yep, and I want to ask a question to people in the chat, right? McNeil and Acuna make more sense than Acuna Iglesias, and I'm gonna tell you why. Everybody just assumes that Acuna is MLB ready, right? We don't know once the teams, our opponents, adjust to Acuna. Does Acuna adjust? We don't know that. If Acuna has problems adjusting to Major League pitching once they adjust to him, you will be going to Jose Iglesias to be a starting second baseman. And do we all remember what happened to Jose Iglesias? And Chris brought this up later in the year into the postseason, right? What was the issue with Jose Iglesias? He looked like he was starting to break down when McNeil went down and he was the starter every single day, right? If Acuna shows that he can't be ready to go and is struggling, you're going to Jose Iglesias if McNeil's off this team. The safer route, and probably the more productive route, is you start the year with McNeil. Acuna is on the bench. If McNeil struggles, you give Acuna the opportunity. If not, you can use both of them in situations, or you go to your minors and you go to your depth if Ronnie Mauricio is available, if Jet Williams is ready to go. one of those guys who got an opportunity as well. So to go Acuna Iglesias is a dangerous game to play. And by the way, guys, I don't think Chris brought it up. Maybe I missed it. Iglesias hired Scott Boras, right? That's a situation where we know Iglesias isn't going to get a minor league deal like he did this year with the Mets. He's getting a major league deal from somebody. He's going to be valuable, if not for the Mets, somebody else. We have to remember that. There might be one team. It might be a bad team. But if they say, hey, Jose, we got a top prospect that is a year away. We want you to be a stopgap. We're going to start you at second base. He's gone. It's just that simple. The Mets can't promise Jose Iglesias a starting job over McNeil and Acuna. It just can't happen. Iglesias is going to get a very, very minimal one-year deal for the Mets as a bench player. Now, Iglesias might accept that, but he didn't hire Scott Boras to take minimal deal to be a backup. He's going to get more money from somebody. And the safer route is just to go with Acuna and McNeil, because that's the safer route to go. Because you can't handcuff your team by trading McNeil and hoping Acuna becomes the MLB player we hope he can be. Because if he's not, Jose Iglesias is going to be a starting second baseman. Everybody's already complaining about Jose Siri being the 8th or 9th hitter. Where do you think Iglesias is at? The bottom. And this is the guy who broke down, who was the starter when McNeil went down. He broke down. And he broke down even worse in the playoffs. And Chris brought that up, and that was a great job by him, pinpointing that Iglesias was breaking down. And he brought
in the playoffs. I think he did a very good job in the regular season.
Correct. But he eventually broke down because he hasn't been a starter in a couple of years. So, that's the big difference. And I think it's a safer route to go Acuna McNeil just because of the point I just said. So again, guys, remember, it ain't going to be all three of these guys. It doesn't make sense.
This is how I see it playing, Rob. This is how I see it playing out in terms of a combination. This is any one of these three combinations is how it could play out, right? McNeil or Acuna, McNeil or Iglesias, right? And obviously you'd have Iglesias or Acuna. If McNeil and Acuna is the duo, McNeil's going to start. Whether I want Acuna to start is a different question and a different answer, but McNeil's going to start because I do think that for some reason, McNeil still has the trust of this organization, which is also a factor, right? I think that he somehow does. So be it. If Acuna and Iglesias is the combination and Jeff McNeil, goes elsewhere via trade, which I don't think is happening at all. Again, I'll be very adamant about that. Then Acuna is your everyday starter, which are you going to take that risk if you're the New York Mets? Probably not. Yeah. If McNeil and Iglesias are on the same team together, that's probably the most perfect world situation with Acuna starting in AAA. I would love to run it back with those two guys. I'm very adamant about that because I do think that Iglesias also serves a purpose of, depending on what happens with Pete Alonso, the ability for Iglesias to actually play third base could be a little bit significant. Now, I'm not advocating for a world where Jose Iglesias is your everyday starting second baseman. I'm not. That's just simply not who he is. And yes, he did a decent job filling in full time when McNeil went down during the stretch of the season. But we got to be very honest about his age and just where he's at in his career, right? So, and I have no doubt in my mind that he wants to return to the Mets. But if he does return to the Mets, I feel like it's just going to have to be platooning with McNeil again. Yeah. And with the outfield situation, I know everyone wants to say that McNeil can play outfield and that's what makes him, this versatile player. McNeil's outfield defense is a non-factor for me. He's serviceable out there. He's not make or break. And again, with the outfield situation commencing in 2025, there's not going to be any room for McNeil to find any games in the outfield anyways, at least not on a large majority basis. So he's going to be at second base. And that kind of hinders a lot of things that you would want to do with moving guys around in the infield. So I don't know, man. I take a look at this and I say, there's also the flip side of the coin of like McNeil has 2 years left on his contract. Acuna might not be the everyday starter, might not be ready to take on that conversation in that situation like this season in 2025. But if not in 2026, then when? Then we're having different conversations. And if McNeil's still blocking him in that season and you still can't find a trade partner, then what are we doing? You know what I mean? So like this is a larger problem that really is between McNeil and Acuna, and like you just be bringing in an extra piece in the whole merry-go-round if you bring back Iglesias, which I'm fine to do. If there's a world where Acuna starts in AAA, I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
But the larger question is, when it comes around to even 2026 time, is McNeil still going to be your starter over Acuna? And if that's the case, then I think it's a little bit ridiculous.
Well, yeah. I think the reason why McNeil is untradeable is because there's 2 years left on his deal. I think if it was a 1-year deal, I think he can easily be traded. Somebody would take a flyer on him for 1 year, even if you take on some money. I think it's a little bit easier than the 2-year deal that is. And look, it has nothing to do with. And guys, we don't know if Acuna is ready. Stop saying that like he played every single day, like we knew. He really didn't. He really didn't. He got a couple of opportunities. He had a couple of good moments, but again, there wasn't enough proof of him being an everyday player. Let's see how he adjusts to the major league teams that adjust to him, because that's when you become a major leaguer. You become a major leaguer once teams adjust to you and you adjust back. That's when you establish yourself as a major leaguer.
So how's he going to get that chance, though, is my question. How's he going to get that chance? The way he gets that chance is if Iglesias goes elsewhere and Acuna is a bench piece and platoons.
Well, that's what we're talking about, is that McNeil, it's either McNeil, Acuna, Iglesias, or Acuna. That's all it could be if Acuna is going to be on this team in opening day.
Would you be okay with the situation of McNeil and Iglesias? Would you be okay with that?
I would be, because I think that would be fine. I think that they would supplement each other well. And it's not the end of the world that it's not the end of the world that Acuna goes into minor leagues for 2 months and he'll be up here eventually again. Like, it's not the end of the world. But I find that hard to believe that they're going to continue to pay McNeil and bring back Iglesias be a backup or a platoon guy. And I don't think the Mets are going to give him $5-6 million, because he's probably going to get that elsewhere, and he's probably going to get a starting job.
$5 million?
Absolutely.
I don't know about that.
100%. Look, you got to look at it this way, right? There's going to be teams out there that are going to offer him a starting job, even if it's a bad team. You don't hire Scott Boras to get $1 million or $2 million. Me and you can negotiate that deal. I'm sorry. He's going to get between $4 and $6 million for a 1-year deal. Now, I haven't checked the spell track of what he possibly could be getting, but you don't hire Scott Boras to get $1 million or $2 million. Chris, we can negotiate that. And I'm an idiot. So, it's not that difficult to negotiate $1-2 million, to be a backup role. It's just a fact. So, I don't see it any other way. I think he can easily get between $4 and $6 million easily. And even if it is on a backup role, why would he come back to the Mets for $2 million? It doesn't make sense. It honestly doesn't. And he went on Boomer and Gio a couple of days ago, and he says he loves it here, right? He hope he comes back, but he left it very, very much open. And they brought it up that he hired Scott Boras, and he kind of hinted at the fact that, yeah, he's looking, he hired Scott Boras to get him the best possible deal. So, it's very unlikely. It's more likely that Iglesias is not on this team, and you're going to have McNeil and Acuna, which is probably the better way to go, to be quite honest with you.
Well, his market is, I think his market is going to be limited anyways, because if he wants to pursue the whole OMG thing, he's going to need to be in a major market. If Steven's saying the Royals are interested, I'm sorry, his music career is not taking off in Kansas City. That's just a fact of the matter. You know what I mean?
But you know what though? You know what? We already downloaded this song, the remix as well. So it's already done, right? The money's made. Right? Pitbull already got his money. Like, it doesn't matter, right? So it comes back to the same thing, right? I think the fact that he knows his career is on the verge of ending, right? If he wants to stay with the Mets, he has to take a discount. But again, you don't hire Scott Boras to take a discount. So I find it very, very unlikely that Jose Iglesias is going to be a part of the Mets organization in 2025. It might piss some people off.
I also think that he might be gone. I will caveat all of this by saying that I think that's the case.
Like would I want him there? Absolutely. I think he was great for this team. Right? The OMG thing was fun, but it was more about the culture inside the clubhouse. As soon as he walked in that clubhouse, things changed right away. So, do you value that? Do you value that at $4 to $5 to $6 million for a backup? No, you just don't do that. Sorry, you just don't. And again, Scott Boras, that's the issue. If I don't know, we'll see. Again, I think that's something that I just think he's going to find a little bit better of a deal, and he might even get a starting job, even if it's for a bad team. And if you're a major leaguer, you're looking for the last few dollars, especially at the end of your career. You're looking to, pocket a little bit more money and maybe get a starting job. And look, at the end of the day, if you have a good year as a starter for a bad team, guess what? You're getting traded to a contender at the deadline. That's the other thing he can look at as well. So, unfortunately, I think it's going to be McNeil and Acuna to start 2025. Unfortunate for everybody that bought the OMG signs and the shirts and all that stuff. And people made businesses because of that. So, all right. Last topic. Sevy, Alonso, who's back? And the reason why I brought this up, they both declined the qualifying offer, which I guess was more obvious than probably I thought when it came to Sevy, but he did, right? I guess, he vetted out there. He did some vetting and realized he can get a multi-year deal. Good for him. And we know Alonso is going to get a multi-year deal. So I'm going to ask you a quick question. If not because of your opinion, your heart, your mind, anything that you want to lean towards either guy, who do you believe is more likely to be back in 2025, Severino or Alonso?
I think someone's going to give Sevy 4 years. I really do. I don't think it's going to be the Mets. And I know my guy Carlos Ramos in the chat's going to hate this answer, but I do think that Pete Alonso is more likely, again, not 100%, but more likely to be back with the Mets than Luis Severino is. Again, pitching, especially in this market, is a dime a dozen. I mean, it's your top guys, and then you have a couple of B-tier guys, and one of those B-tier guys is Luis Severino. So there's going to be some team that's out there that's desperate enough to go ahead and give him that 4 years. And with the way that the Mets, and I understand you can't prioritize the farm system in these kind of conversations, but you almost have to with the guys that are coming up in terms of how you're going to build out your rotation. I just don't see David Stearns, even given the bounce back season that Sevy had. I was a fan of Luis Severino in the Mets uniform. I was a big fan before he even took the field for the Mets in terms of the overall signing. I knew he had this type of season in him. And there's an alarm going off, so hopefully nobody's hearing that through my microphone. But regardless, I take a look at the options at first base that the Mets have. If Pete Alonso walks, I mean, yeah, you've got Christian Walker. You've got a guy like Carlos Santana out there that you can sign maybe for a 1-year deal or trade. I forgot if he's under contract or not. But, other than that, I don't see a world where Mark Vientos is going to first base. I do not see a world where David Stearns transitions Mark Vientos to first base. Now, if he does, am I going to complain about it? No, I'm not. Because I don't think that first base is a position that's going to be hard to pick up. And Pete Alonso is an okay defender when it comes to picking baseballs and all of that. But you look at the actual metrics of Pete Alonso as a first baseman, his defense sucks. The actual advanced metrics of it. And then you take a look at how he throws the baseball from first base, whether it's a flip or to second base for a double play. I mean, it's atrocious. So, I don't know exactly how this situation is going to play out. And these two guys are, if Sevy is willing to take a 3-year deal, maybe perhaps an opt-out after the second year for him to like prioritize a player option. If he does well the next 2 seasons, he can go ahead and get maybe another bigger contract for another 2 years. I don't see it happening because there's going to be some team that looks at the season that Severino had and it's like, that's my starting pitcher number 3. And we're going to give him 4 years to be that. And I just don't think it's going to be the Mets, man. I don't. So if the question solely is between these 2 guys, Alonso versus Sevy, I'm going to give the edge to Alonso. If the question is, are both of these guys going to be back or not? That's a larger question. To what I will tell you is that both of these guys could be gone. And that's just the fact of the matter. So, it's like, which question are you asking me? Because that will probably take an hour to sort of decipher. But yeah, that's my answer. That's a really roundabout way of concluding that answer, but that's my answer.
Yeah, and the last part you just said is it possible that both of these guys are not going to be back? I'm leaning towards that. If I had to choose one, I think it's Severino over Alonso. And I've said that I've said this from the middle of the season. Pete Alonso is going to get a $200 million deal from somebody. He's going to get that 7-year that he's been looking for $200 million. I don't know if it's the Cubs, if it's the Mariners, somebody else, the crosstown guys in the Yankees. The fact of the matter is, and I think this relies on Juan Soto situation. I think if the Mets get Juan Soto and the Yankees lose out on Juan Soto, they're going to pivot their way to Pete Alonso to try to get some type of more offense into that lineup around Aaron Judge. And they need a first baseman. I truly believe Pete Alonso is going to get $200 million from somebody. The Mets aren't going that far. I do think that Stearns is willing to give Severino 3 years with a 4th-year option. Depending if it's a mutual option, vesting option, I feel like they would do that. And the only reason why is because I'm picking between Severino and Alonso. I'm not picking between Severino or Burns or Severino, Snell, Fried, or anything like that. If it comes down to these 2 players, I think Alonso's going to get that $200 million because people value the position player more when it comes to overall money. They don't mind giving years to position players. I feel like with Severino, I think there's enough teams hesitant to give more years to Severino because of his track record. Not
you
more.
Think so? You think so?
Yep, absolutely.
Taijuan Walker got a 4-year deal worth $72 million with the Phillies, and John Bray got a 4-year deal with the Rangers worth whatever that was. I think it was like 56 or something like that, which is what Severino's projected. I'm not really sure I agree with that.
But here's the difference. Nobody had a year, even the year that Severino had his worst year of his career with the Yankees prior to the Mets signing him. Look at the years. There was a tremendous amount of injuries and going downwards for Severino until he became a Met, right? There was a lot of upside. Everybody always talked about the upside of Taijuan Walker, right? After the injury that he had, what was it, Tommy John, everything like that, he came back. And same thing with John Gray, right? It was the trajectory that people believe. I still think there's still skepticism with Severino that I think it's more of a mental game with Severino. I think he needs to be at the right place at the right time. I think if he goes to, an unknown place and it's going to let him, go off in the distance and go on the mound with no thought process. I think the reason why Severino was solid for us was because they kept him grounded. I don't think they let his mind get away from him when he was on the mound, right? You saw that times this year where, when things got away from him a little bit and the Mets kind of lost track of that mental game that he plays in his head, he loses it. He starts to go to one pitch. And I think a lot of teams are going to shy away from that. And what Stearns knows about Severino and what Mendoza's relationship with Severino, I think that's a bigger deal than you probably lead it on, Chris. I do think the Mets will be willing to give 3 years and a possible vesting option or a mutual option for the 4th year, or at least a team option for the 4th year. Now, I agree with you. There might be a desperate team out there that might give him a 4-year deal. But I know there's no way the Mets are going to give $200 million to Pete Alonso. That's why I think it's more likely Sevy comes back over Alonso. Because
I'm just going to say it. If the Mets get Soto, I think they're re-signing Alonso. 100%. I think if the Mets get Soto, they are going to go for it and sign both of these guys to be in the middle of the order, to go alongside Brandon Nimmo at the top of the order, Mark Vientos, and Francisco Lindor. I think that if you get Juan Soto, the play is to bring Pete Alonso back. I think that's what their play is at the very minimum. I'm just, again, speculation, nothing concrete behind that. That's my personal opinion. If Juan Soto indicates to the Mets that he is planning to sign with the Mets are going to go full bore and go get Pete Alonso, regardless of what it takes. And I think in the comment section, I've been saying this all along. Where is it? Tube U, I think there in your chat, was saying 200 mil for 7 years of Pete Alonso and not going that 8th year. I think that gets it done. $28 million was always my sweet spot for Pete Alonso. I always said that Boris is going to do just enough to make him the highest paid first baseman, whether he's performed like it or not, and people are just going to have to live with that. And again, as soon as Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is up for his contract, guess what's going to happen? If Pete Alonso is making $28 million, Vlad's going to make 29. And the next first base is going to make 30. And this is how it's going to keep going on and on and on. That this is how it works. So again, the home run numbers are there with Pete Alonso. You're going to get that. The runners in scoring position numbers suck. We know that over the past 2 seasons. And that's been the biggest knock on Pete Alonso. But again, do you let that kind of guy walk if Juan Soto now joins your team in terms of that power that you now have with 2 guys that can hit 40 plus home runs for you in the middle of your order? And again, money aside, $200 million is $200 million, but it's not our money at the end of the day. It's not, it's really not. So again,
I agree with that.
And I think that if Juan Soto does not sign with the New York Mets, I think we're having a different conversation. And I think that at that point, then Pete Alonso might be off the table at that point for the Mets and they just go elsewhere.
But wouldn't you think that the Mets would have a hell of a lot more money if they don't sign Juan Soto to bring back Pete Alonso then?
No, because you just cut your losses at that point. You'd cut your losses at that. The attraction of bringing back Pete Alonso is to pair him with Juan Soto and Mark Vientos, and that's the attraction. If Juan Soto's not coming, we don't need Pete Alonso. I
don't agree with that. I disagree 100%. I think the Juan Soto, missing out on Juan Soto is going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on Stearns with the fan base to bring back Pete Alonso. Because look,
I don't think Stearns feels pressure, Rob.
No, I think there's a ton of it. There's already a ton with Stearns with Pete Alonso already. If he loses out on Juan Soto and he goes back to the Yankees, Pete Alonso, there's going to be so much more pressure because now you're going to hear it on Sports Talk Radio. You're going to have fans of us. I can guarantee I can see it today. Juan Soto signs with the Yankees. You're going to see all the fans. Oh, the Mets must sign Pete Alonso. You know why? Because people are going to go right back to where their hearts lie, and that is Pete Alonso. It happens all the time. Not saying that Stearns is going to think like that. I don't think Stearns is going to fall for that pressure because he's smarter than that, but you lose out on Juan Soto and you say that, oh, Pete Alonso is not going to be on this team either. Where do you go? You're going to sign Christian Walker and Anthony Santander? That's going to make everybody feel better? Absolutely not.
I mean, it's a plausible option. It's a plausible option.
I agree with you. And I'm not going to be mad.
That would make me feel good.
Yeah,
that would make me feel good.
Right now, that's 55 to 60 home runs. That's perfectly fine with me, especially if you can add more pitching and don't think this, you let out your lineup a little bit more as well. So, and that's probably
that would make me feel good. Again, it's a different conversation. Like if David Stearns is really caring what like these guys from, WFAN or whatever, whatever the hell you want to, say the media, if David Stearns is really on his phone and like, hey, WFAN guys are going to be mad at me if I don't sign Pete Alonso or re-sign him, especially if I don't get. I don't think David Stearns is operating under that kind of realm. I don't think David Stearns feels pressure. He's already had successful seasons in the past, working with a whole lot less than what he's working with right now. So again, I don't think he feels any pressure at all. And so to say that the baseball media is going to kind of drive him to keep Pete Alonso, I'm not sure if I buy it. But again, I think that the best case scenario is if Juan Soto just says yes and you just re-sign Pete Alonso, because again, that top 5 is a force to be reckoned with. Can you imagine a top 5 of Lindor, Nimmo, or maybe even Nimmo as a 5 hitter, Lindor, Vientos, who excels at the 2 spot, Pete Alonso or Soto flip-flopping between Pete Alonso and Soto, and I really do think Pete Alonso should bat third in that scenario, and Soto should bat cleanup, and then a guy like Brandon Nimmo, oh my goodness. And then Starling Marte, if he's on the team, again, this is the reason. So if you get those top 5 guys, I don't care who bats 6, 7, 8, 9. Jose Siri can bat 9, that'd be great. Dude, imagine the power that this team has with Jose Siri batting 9 or 8, and those 5 guys at the top of your order. Oh my gosh. I am like salivating even thinking about that right now, about the just power potential of that lineup. Again, you know, it's a little far-fetched, I would say, but I've been very adamant about if Juan Soto is going to sign with the Mets, that does not take them out of the running of Pete Alonso.
Absolutely.
And
100%.
That top 5 doesn't scare you, Carlos? Really?
It's better than the Yankee top 5.
That's concerning. Can you name me a better top 5 in baseball, maybe other than the Dodgers?
Yeah, that's basically it.
That's it. It's them and the Dodgers. So that's a little bit of a question mark in terms of how that doesn't scare you. But anyways, I digress. That's would scare me if I'm an opposing pitcher.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with that. That, you know, like it's I think it's still like that. It'll be Soto and Alonso. I just think that kind of makes sense in a way, even though I don't think that it's, if they get Soto, like it automatically believed that they were going to sign Alonso as well. I think they can lean more towards Christian Walker, to be quite honest with you. I think that way. But again, I'd be crazy to not like the Soto Alonso offseason. That's insane. Like that's $800 million between 2 players. Like,
I'm kind of surprised. I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm kind of surprised that there's a lot of pushback on pivoting to a guy like Christian Walker for like 3 years. There's been a lot of pushback.
I think it's the age.
It's the age, and like I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I'm like, I don't care if he's 33. You're going to pay Christian Walker the same amount until the same age as if you would be paying Pete Alonso, if not 1 year younger. So like, that doesn't really quite make sense to me. Anyways, I think people that are scared of Christian Walker and committing to him for those 3 years would want maybe more of a stopgap type of first baseman, whoever that name may be. And then you go to a guy like Ryan Clifford. But like, that is light years more risky, because Ryan Clifford could still develop into that first baseman in those 3 years that you have Christian Walker manning first base. Again, it's a whole overarching thing, but yeah. I don't know.
And we also have the DH. If Christian Walker gets too old to play first base, you got Ryan Clifford that can fill in, and your DH can be Christian Walker. It's, you know, same thing with Alonso. If Alonso's getting up there in age, he can't play the field anymore, you got him as the DH. So either way it can work out, but it's going to be so. Look, this is the great part about the offseason, is that it's all speculation until we hear rumors, right? You know, what have we heard so far? We heard about the Juan Soto meetings. We heard about Willie Adames with the Mets. Other than that, it's all bullshit. That everything else is nonsense. Everything we know, Willie Adames' interest is real, because it's been reported by multiple real reporters, or at least known reporters, and also, and not the offer, just interest, and obviously the Soto meetings. So
I see some like loyalness talk to the Mets. We all knew, like Rob and I both told you that Pete Alonso could say whatever he wants to the media. He's not taking a team discount to stay with the Mets, like regardless of what he says to the media. The same reason why, you know, I get that Aaron Judge kind of did it with the Yankees, and that's what the barometer is amongst New York baseball fans of like, Pete Alonso needs to be Aaron Judge and take that discount. But like, come on, like, how often do guys really do that at the end of the day? It's a business at the end of the day, and Aaron Judge is still making, you know, over $300 million with his respective team. So the margins are a little bit different when you're talking about Pete Alonso. So I don't think it's the same scenario. I understand where you guys are going with that, but I've been very honest with you all. Even last offseason, when we were trying to figure out if they're going to negotiate a contract last offseason, I said, I don't care what Pete Alonso says to the media. He can say he enjoys being a Met all he wants. But the fact of the matter is, he's probably going to go to the highest bidder as well, just like Juan Soto is. So,
correct. Yeah. And we got to remember, guys, the Mets did offer him, Pete Alonso, a deal, and it was a fair deal, in my opinion. I think it was a team-friendly deal, and it was very fair for what the market was giving first baseman. He was right in that middle of the road where I think it was like $24 million per year, which is, pretty damn good. It was about $4 to $5 million more than what he was making in the arbitration period for Pete Alonso. So I think it was fair. So if he really wanted to be here, he could have took that fair deal and give the Mets a hell of a lot more money to work with this year, currently on the books. So, and not saying that the Mets wouldn't spend it anyway, but he's looking for he's going to the highest bidder. And I said that from the beginning. So that loyalty means shit. If you believe that if the Mets give him 7 years, $200 million, that's not a discount. That is the market. So, for anybody who's like, oh, look, the Mets got him back. Yeah. Not because of a discount. So if he says, oh, I always wanted to be here, bullshit. You wanted the money, which is fine.
Yeah, facts.
I never take away from the money aspect of it. Like, get every penny you're worth or can get. But the fact that he's taking a discount is hilarious. And if we remember, guys, Aaron Judge, that $40 million was more than anybody else. Not just outfielders. It was everybody else in baseball. The average annual value. So Pete Alonso is not getting anywhere near the highest AAV in baseball because he's not that close to Aaron Judge at all. So we'll see. But, Chris thinks that Alonso could be back over Sevy. I think Sevy can be back more likely over Alonso. So the final topic of the day, we're going to quick it off really quickly. The rapid fire segment, which a lot of people seem to like. I get comments all the time about rapid fire, even though the questions aren't perfect, but it is an interesting topic. So we talked about bullpen. We talked about Siri, Meneses. We talked about the infield possibilities. Well, I want to know about Brandon Nimmo, right? Down year, injury plagued year. What do you see from Brandon Nimmo? Another year older, basically a year after signing that contract, is not the center fielder as he got paid to be a center fielder. Now he's a hobbled left fielder who is only going to get older. What do you believe you're going to get from Brandon Nimmo? Because he's had these freak injuries. He collapses in the hotel, whatever the hell that is. There's a lot of issues going on with Nimmo that is concerning to me for a guy who just signed the contract a year, 2 years ago. What do you think the impact's going to be with Brandon Nimmo on the health end and the production end, knowing they had a really bad season last year?
I really think that this was just a bump in the road for Nimmo. And I know that's like a feel good sort of answer, and I'm not meaning for it to be that. But, he did have a lot of problems. He did go through, a lineup change that he had to adjust to. Going to the middle of the order, wasn't really accustomed to doing that. A lot of people, such as myself, and I'll take accountability for that, I saw the power numbers he was putting up in the leadoff spot, and I was like, listen, if you want to just make that trade-off of Lindor and Nimmo, I'd be happy to do that. And of course, it benefited Lindor, but it came at the expense of Nimmo's production dropping. And I think that if you find a consistent spot to put him in the order, and you don't change that around, I think he could benefit from that. Am I going to be unrealistic and, given his injury history, tell you that he's going to play outfield for the rest of his contract? No. This guy is going to have to play. He's going to have to DH a lot of times at the tail end of his contract. And this is why it's so important for me to build and retain that nucleus of outfielders that you have coming up. Yep. Or at least, at the very minimum, get a younger version of Brandon Nimmo in the doors over the next couple of years. Again, that's not really, I guess, a concern for the Mets right now, but maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to have to start having those conversations surrounding Brandon Nimmo and potentially just taking him out of the outfield if you want to preserve his bat, because that could be what it takes. So that's why I'm kind of high on Drew Gilbert, because, if anything should happen to Brandon Nimmo this season injury-wise, I think Drew Gilbert is the guy to call up. But again, if you're going to think about moving Brandon Nimmo to the DH spot in the future, I also think that Drew Gilbert is the perfect guy with his youth being, I think, 24 years old, to kind of overtake that position. And again, this is a very like early sort of thought process of that. But in terms of strict offensive numbers, in terms of the approach that he's going to have in 2025, we saw the approach that he had right in 2023 and 2022, the shortened approach. Yes, he had some power success, but he wasn't really selling out for the power, right? He was still being disciplined. He was still getting on base at a well above average clip. I think that version of Nimmo is going to come back, but you have to have a appropriate idea of where he's realistically going to be consistently in the lineup if you're Carlos Mendoza, if that makes sense. So I'm not worried about Brandon Nimmo. I know that there's a lot of question marks surrounding Brandon Nimmo. I know that the swing has lengthened. I know that strikeouts are a concern. The average was a concern. I'm not that concerned with Brandon Nimmo. I could be eating crow at the end of 2025 saying, wow, this guy really sucked again. Because, again, in 2024, he sucked. Let's be honest with you. I'm going to be honest with you. I like Brandon Nimmo. He sucked. So, I would hope he bounces back, because if I'm putting him in my scary top 5 lineup that I just mentioned, you'd need to get a guy like Brandon Nimmo to produce at his peak.
Yeah.
So I'm really expecting a lot of big things out of Brandon Nimmo. I'm not giving up on him. And, the production in 2024 doesn't scare me from, I guess, kind of assuming that he'll get back on track in 2025.
Yeah.
So that's my answer to that. What do you think, I guess? Because we always had conversations of Brandon Nimmo. I'm kind of curious about what you think before the question that I have for you.
So he concerns me in the outfield, especially with all the injuries. I feel like, he had plantar fasciitis at the end of the year. That stuff flares up at any moment. That's not going away anytime soon. So, can it flare up at any moment? I think that's another reason why Jose Siri is a part of this team, along with Tyrone Taylor. They might play a big role in left field as well. Defensive replacement late in games. Sit in Nimmo for twice a week just to keep him healthy. But I do agree with you with the lineup situation. The 20 home runs, the 70 plus RBIs. I think you can get that easily from Brandon Nimmo without putting him in the 3 spot or the 4 spot, because he even hit in the 4 spot a couple of times. The 3 spot, I thought it was a disaster from the start. It ended up being it. Not saying that I knew it was going to happen, but I just felt like putting him in that spot put too much pressure on him, and he started to look for the power more, started to reach more for the power, and that led to the more strikeouts. It led to the lower average. It led to less walks. What is 2 things we know about Nimmo? He takes a lot of pitches, he walks a lot, and he doesn't strike out a lot. That was what he was great at. Now, because Lindor showed what he could do at the leadoff spot, that's not happening. If you get Juan Soto, Chris, Juan Soto's batting second. He didn't move for the New York Yankees. He's not moving away from batting second for the New York Mets. So where's Nimmo going to go? Not 3, not 4. You said it. 5th spot. I think that's a perfect spot for Brandon Nimmo. He don't have to be the biggest run producer, but he can be a solid run producer in the 5th spot. And if you leave him there and stop moving him around and put him in big time run production positions in the lineup, I think he's going to be fine. I think he can back up his average to a 260, 270 hitter. I think he can hit 20 home runs easily. And he can hit his 80, 85. I think he hit the RBI mark that he hit this year. That's more than enough. We don't need him. If you need Nimmo to be a 100 RBI guy, there's issues in your lineup, big time. Like, you can't, will we take it? Absolutely. But you can't get 100 RBIs and then strike out 200 plus times. Your average goes down 30 points and also take less walks. That doesn't make me feel better. It feels like you're going to have less better at bats from Brandon Nimmo, where his best approach is taking pitches and striking out less. I think that's it. And he can still do that and hit 20 home runs and still provide that power and get that 80 RBI mark. I think that's perfectly fine. And I think it stresses out the lineup a little bit more. And you put Soto in the right spot. Soto is the guy you want in the 2-hole. He's the guy that will take pitches, work a count, get Lindor ready to go steal some bases. And he's just a perfect number 2 hitter, Juan Soto, who can hit 35 home runs. And then, you can, however you want to do. You want to put Alonso number 3? I agree with you. I like Alonso in the 3 hole as well.
Vientos 4?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. 100%. Yep. So that's where I go with that.
So my rapid fire question to you is, given the power that you just stated, right, and we've stated this entire stream so far, where do you, first of all, I want you to answer, it's a 2-part question. One, the same question that you just had for me of Brandon Nimmo, my same question to you, the same application of Francisco Alvarez, and what kind of step does he take? Because he had a very down year offensively and defensively, you could say, I guess, as well, and the power dropped immensely, right? It dropped to a T. But again, you take a look at Alvarez, if he gets back on pace to 20 plus home runs, Siri, 20 plus home runs in your 8 and 9 spot, right? Then you go ahead and you have Vientos. And that's my second part of the question. What home run total over under would you put Vientos in a full season and Alvarez coming off of, a season of down home runs, but giving you 25 home runs the year before? So I'm making this too complicated. First part of the question, Alvarez, where do you see him at? And then second part of the question, over under home run totals. Way too early over under for both Vientos and Alvarez. I'll be right back 1 second. I'm listening to you.
Yep. So first with Alvarez, I think what impressed me defensively is that when he got to the playoffs, he became a completely different backstop guy behind the plate, blocking balls. Why he didn't do that during the season is beyond me, but he became a better blocker of the ball in the postseason, which is great to see in the postseason. But I think he's going to take that, what he realized that he can do, into the regular season. So I think he's going to be good there. I think he has a tremendous arm. I just think he had a bad go of it throwing out runners. You saw in the playoffs, he did a better job at that too. So I'm not worried about Francisco Alvarez defensively. I think he learned and figured out what he had to do in the postseason defensively, throwing out runners and blocking balls is going to make him a better defensive player. I do think he is a 20 home run guy. Now, he's got to stop swinging for the fences on every pitch and that big uppercut swing. But if he stays away from that uppercut swing every single time and just stays within himself, he can easily hit 20 plus home runs in any given season. So I think he's going to have a tremendous bounce back year, and that's a huge deal if you're going to have him in the bottom of the lineup. Even though I think to start opening day, I think he's going to be batting 6 behind Nimmo, to be quite honest with you. And I think that would be fine in the beginning, working with that. When it comes to so I'm going to say over 20 home runs for Francisco Alvarez. I think he's going to have a bounce back home run wise. Mark Vientos, I think he's hitting over 30 easily. I think this is the guy that showed that superstar potential in the postseason, right? Nothing got to that kid. Amazing how poised he was in the biggest moments in the postseason. He was our MVP in the postseason. He would have won the MVP of the NLCS. If the Mets would have won the World Series, he probably would have been the MVP of the World Series. That's how clutch this kid was. Why do I expect regular season games he's going to be worse? I find now, do I think the league's going to adjust to him a little bit because he still has issues with that breaking ball? Probably. You're going to see a lot more breaking balls from Vientos. Now, he learned because in the postseason they started to do that. He laid off them. And then when they made mistakes, especially high fastballs, he crushed them. So 30 plus home runs over for Vientos. I think he's going to have a great year. I think he's going to get a couple of MVP votes. I think that's how good of an offensive year he's going to have. And this is somebody who wasn't very confident in Vientos being an overall player. Now, I'm not saying he's going to win an MVP, but I think he can hit 275 easily, hit 30 plus home runs. And with that, with a whole season, he can hit 100 RBIs. That's MVP potential right there. That's Lindor numbers. That's MVP potential.
I hate looking at these lists that like Bleacher Report puts out there or whatever in terms of like top 10 at each position. But like looking at how scarce third base and catcher is in terms of production around the league is, they had Alvarez ranked as the 6th best catcher in the league, even after this down year. And they had, I think it was 6. Again, it was top 10 for sure, but I think it was like number 6 or whatever. Because some Yankees fan quoted it saying that, Austin Wells is better than Francisco Alvarez, whatever. And then they had Mark Vientos as like a top 5 third baseman, if I'm not mistaken. Like that just puts into perspective, how scarce some of the production values are at each of these positions. It really does. So again, I'm expecting a lot of big things from each guy that struggled in 2024 and beyond. But I take a look at the just power numbers that this lineup could have with a guy like Juan Soto and Pete Alonso in the middle. If you're able to retain Alonso and have Juan Soto in your lineup, and if you get a bounce back year from Brandon Nimmo, right, with 20 plus home runs, if you get a bounce back year from Francisco Alvarez with 20 plus home runs, like this is, I see the vision, and it's going to be harder to actually do, right? It's easy to say, it's hard for David Stearns to make that happen, but I see the vision. But yeah, I'm not worried about Francisco Alvarez at all. I think if I had to put a distinct number, I came into this season, everyone's saying that, I did think Mark Vientos was going to be the DH, obviously, before the JD Martinez signing. Mm-hmm. And I said that he was going to hit 22 home runs, which a lot of people even got on me about, saying, are you serious? 22 home runs for Mark Vientos? This guy might not even touch the field for the Mets this season with Brett Beatty at third base, etc. It's like, calm down. 22 home runs. Boom, 27. And I think if I had to put a number on at least Francisco Alvarez, because I agree with you, 100% Mark Vientos 30 plus. I mean, in a full season sample size last season, he would hit 30 plus home runs. I mean, how many games did he really miss in that season? That would have put him at 30 plus, in my opinion. Francisco Alvarez, man, I don't know if I see him quite getting to that 25 mark. I think that if he's consistent enough, then he has that kind of capability. He has that upside. But I'm like kind of leaning into the 22, 23 range for Francisco Alvarez. Not quite the 25 that he had a couple seasons ago, but maybe 22, 23. So I'm going to keep it a little bit realistic in my mindset and a little bit more, I guess, conservative in that point on the Alvarez home runs, but I'm going to shoot for the moon with the Vientos home runs at 30 plus, maybe even going on 35. I like Vientos that much. Again, all field power with Vientos. How many times do we see him take a ball deep to center field, being a no-doubter, and right field? I mean, it's insane. It's very hard to repeat that.
Opposite field power is just, it was something that we always talked about with Pete Alonso when he's going right. The opposite field power. Vientos just has that natural power to right field or right center field. So, yeah, guys, listen, we spent 2 hours, just nearly 2 hours on a hot stove, and the Mets traded for Jose Siri and signed Joey Meneses to a minor league deal. You know what that tells you? How freaking excited we are and you guys are when it comes to the possibility of a massive offseason for the New York Mets. And it's only beginning, right? Tomorrow is the non-tender deadline. That's a possibility. Somebody brought it up earlier about the Mets looking at a couple of bullpen arms that might be non-tendered. That's a possibility. David Stearns will be all over that. So the first key date is over. The qualifying offers the decisions are made. It was the other day. The owners' meetings ends today. Tomorrow is the non-tender deadline. And then December starts the other key dates. The draft picks are assigned, the winter meetings, and then the Rule 5 draft. And hopefully by the winter meetings, we have a Juan Soto decision at the very least. And that would be a hell of a lot more to talk about. So, Chris, final thoughts, and then we can end episode 7.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I'm going to be very upfront with you guys. It's unfortunate, but I am going on travel for the holidays starting tomorrow. I'm not going to have my full setup. So it's going to be very hard for me to make consistent content. I'm going to try to do what I can, and that's all I can promise. Again, I've had this situation happen where I had to go on travel for, during the MLB trade deadline, and it's just a crapshoot on travel, in an unfamiliar place. Don't have your setup with you. I don't want to put bad content out there for you all. Each single piece of content, videos, live streams, whatever, I want to make sure that you guys can actually coherently understand me, and I'm not like this fuzzy object on your screen. So again, I'm going to post some shorts as news comes out. So be on the lookout for that in my Mets news in a minute. But I should be back right around that December 2nd or 3rd time frame. So it'll be like a week and a half. So if you guys miss my face, I do apologize about that. Yeah, that's what I'll say from a programming perspective. I do plan on dropping a video or two in between that time frame. And Rob, we can coordinate if I'm available for one of the Mets Hot Stove streams. I'll definitely make myself available, whether that's 15, 30, 45 minutes, maybe not like the full hour and a half, 2 hours that we've been doing here. But I appreciate you guys' support nonetheless. Again, I wanted to be upfront and honest with you about that in case you see a little bit less of me. But when I get back, I'm going to be doing the regular content just as I have been. I've been kind of like shooting out videos left and right almost every day on my channel. So I'm trying to take full advantage of that in terms of before I go on travel. Hit the thumbs up buttons. We definitely appreciate it. It's going to be a very exciting Mets offseason. I will be back for it ahead of the winter meetings, which is really when everything gets ramped up anyways. So I'm not expecting to miss too much when I'm on travel, which is the good news. So I appreciate it. Thank you all so much. If you're a Knicks fan, by the way, in basketball content, my guy Nick and I are going live at 10 p.m. discussing the win last night over the Suns. So appreciate you all being here. Let's go Mets. And I do have a video for you all tomorrow that'll be dropping on the channel at the very minimum. That's it for me. I appreciate it, Rob. Thank you so much.
There you go, guys. Make sure you follow us on X, the official Mets Hot Stove account, NYM Hot Stove, CPNY Sports, and TMWR on X. And guys, episode 7, Mets Hot Stove is in the books. 2 hours in the books, as well as MLB offseason ramps up a little bit more, closer and closer to the winter meetings. With that said, guys, everybody have a great night. As always, Mets fans, let's go Mets, and we'll see you next time on the Mets Hot Stove show on our channels, guys. Have a good night, and let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.
In the dead of night, full of echo. Concrete jungle, dreams bust to grow. Mets in the air, chase glory, no fear. Broken bats, but hearts steer clear. OMG, the chaos, what a scene. Streets buzzing like a machine. Critters from the shadows, chills on my spine. Past haunts, the future shine.